Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 4 of Logicast, the AWS News podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Carl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined today by John, as always, Goodall, as it says, if you're watching this on the screen now in his name badge. How are you doing today, John?
Oh, can't complain. I mean, I can complain, but I'm not going to.
If anybody's watching the video stream, John looks exactly like he always looks, but we have just had a complete faff where he's completely rearranged his room with the sofa on the other side, the microphone, the camera, etc. But now everything just looks all calm and collected as usual. So
It's the perennial swan, isn't it? Graceful and smooth on the top of the water, paddling furiously underneath.
Absolutely. The show must go on. So anyway, all looking good.
I can't complain. I did find some Lego in the process as well, so I now have a little Lego Millennium Falcon that I've found, which is really
nice.
cool.
Nice. Is that a single piece, or do you have to make that up?
No, it's. Hang on, let me do it for the camera. It's
multiple pieces. Yeah. Little kit. Very nice. Yeah. Cool. Anyway, we're not here to talk about Lego. We are here to talk about AWS, and we are joined by a very special guest today, fellow AWS community builder, Bojan Zivic. How are you doing today, Bojan?
Good. It's been both a hot and wet Sydney morning and now evening. And it's great to be across multiple regions with you guys.
Absolutely. We have the opposite, cold and wet morning. So, literally polar opposites on the other side of the world. Bojan, tell us a little bit about what you do for the AWS community and what you do for a living.
Sure. Absolutely. So, as you said earlier, I'm an AWS community builder here in Sydney. But I've actually kickstarted, or rather revived, the Serverless meetup in Brisbane, as well as I've spoken across multiple different meetups and conferences and such across the eastern seaboard of Australia. Also an AWS ambassador, so much like you guys, I work for an AWS partner. And what I do for work, I mean, I'm a principal consultant for a partner. So I talk AWS and make sure to make the right decision inside of AWS, usually within the app moddie sort of space. So serverless containers, all the fun stuff that can go absolutely terribly wrong.
So how's the serverless meetup going in Brisbane?
It's fantastic. Sorry, go on.
You did say Brisbane, did you?
Yeah, I did say Brisbane. Yeah. It's incredible. People think when they think Australia, it's usually Sydney and Melbourne, right? But Brisbane has thrived and grown so much that we went from a small little community of 20 initially and 30, now 40. Our biggest had 70 or so people.
Wow.
And for a country of its size and for a up and coming major city like Brisbane, it's amazing to see. And there's only more to come. There will be some big announcements coming for the AWS community in Brisbane at some point this year. So all I can really say is stay tuned.
Nice. Sounds good. How frequently do you meet?
We are quarterly, only because it's just the most flexible thing. Being out of Sydney myself, I'll fly up for the event. Like, for example, I'm flying up this Wednesday to host a recap. I've got some friends there, fellow organizers, Ilya and Carl. They also contribute to that. Both work at Mantle, so it's very convenient. And it's a good rhythm we've built up. If we have something that comes out major, like something from AWS, or we have a major like explosion, like for example, the stuff that happened with Amazon Prime, why we moved off serverless, we then may have something in between, which could be like a panel to kind of speak on it. But a quarterly sort of setup has worked really well for us.
I think that's why why I had to confirm that you said Brisbane, because I thought, I'm sure he said he's in Sydney. But excuse my ignorance of Australian geography, but how far apart are those cities?
Oh, about an hour and a half's flight. You got to make the most of it. Considering Sydney was very well established, and the place I work for, Mantle Group, we're across all of Australia, everywhere from Perth to Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, Adelaide, you name it. I saw an opportunity and knocked on the door of a few people and said, "Hey, I've got a chance to sponsor an event. We're gonna meet up space in Brisbane. Can I fly up? Because I know we've got a few customers up there anyway." Sure. And then now we've got this regular cadence, which is nice because Brisbane is the very tropical, I would say, main city of Sydney. Like you've got Darwin and such. Obviously, it's very warm as well. But Brisbane really is like you've hit the top part of between subtropical and tropical Australia. So it's lovely.
Very nice. Well, that is real commitment to the community, flying an hour and a half to run your serverless meetup. I drive about 10 minutes into Brighton to run the AWS Brighton user group, so not quite the same. But yeah, I'm impressed with your commitment. Anyway, thank you for telling us what you do for the AWS community, Boyan. That's great to hear. But we're not here to talk just about community. We are here to talk about AWS news. So, as regular listeners to the podcast will know, once a week I curate a list of AWS news in my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter. And then John and I pick a set of the articles that we'd like to take a little bit of a deeper dive into with our guests. So, we do, of course, have a bunch of articles to discuss this week. The first one is an article on InfoQ, which is all about how AWS has added container insights with enhanced observability to ECS, Elastic Container Service. So, John, tell us a little bit about the pains of observability in ECS and how this is going to ease those pains.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that there were pains before, but the solutions that existed were expensive, because when I think container insights, my brain goes, oh, Datadog. I'll just put, sidecar containers in for Fargate, or I'll put something on the host and use a daemon set, something like that. And then you get really good data, really good metrics. You're talking server level if you need that kind of thing. You've got container level for your resource utilization. And then if you do some tracing with X-ray and stuff, you get some really good data there too. But Datadog is, well, it's not cheap. Let's put it that way. It's. I forget what the exact pricing is offhand, and it depends on your particular agreement. But it can be, for small firms at least, prohibitively expensive to use because it is not cheap. AWS has made great strides into turning CloudWatch from this unloved second tier service of 2-3 years ago into something that you could viably use in place of a third party service. Now, I don't see this replacing something like Datadog or New Relic or what have you, but it's certainly going a long way to making this kind of data accessible at a much lower price point than you would have had to pay before. So that's kind of the exciting thing here is, much like they've done with EKS, they've now done it for ECS, and it's just kind of a continuation of the tale of CloudWatch getting better, which is it's really nice. I like to see it.
Cool. Boyan, any thoughts on this?
I've been a big fan because it is that barrier of entry broken down for like proper observability. You're absolutely right, John. A few years back, if you think about it, CloudWatch was this amalgamation of metrics and logs and, well, dashboards you had to kind of make yourself to really get useful. The one thing that I really liked was they give you a very familiar observability dashboard that you might see in your Sumo Logics and what I call DataDogs out of the box. And that's what I think people are really looking for. It's they want that ease of access to their what I call it, deeper insights to their containers and what they're running, as well as something that can give them that view instead of having it engineer it themselves. I think we tend to forget that with some of these bigger providers, they may connect to our environments, but what they can give you out of the box may not kind of align with what we really want. So it's nice to see that AWS did the extra step, which is not only did we build it, we let you view it properly as well.
The article seems to imply that without using something like Datadog prior to this new feature, that it was quite painful to get things like CPU metrics, etc. Have either of you had any experience of having to do that without any kind of third-party observability tools in place?
I've kind of done it a bit, not in the AWS world, which is sort of why it was so painful. It was on an old OpenStack private cloud, and it's just, why are we doing this? Like, what are we? Do we hate ourselves? Why are we trying to do this? And the answer was, well, we can't afford to do anything else. Okay, fine. I'll go and find some open source tooling and I'll kind of fight with it for a bit. But yeah, it can be very painful to get data out of Docker if you don't have some sort of agent running in the cluster, because it's not really exposed. I mean, it is. You can go and you can sit on the server and you can run various Docker commands and you can get this kind of data. But one, you need to be on the server doing it. No. And two, you really need to know what you're looking for in order to find the data. And okay, open source tooling, I'm thinking things like Prometheus and that kind of thing, do a reasonably good job of this. But again, you have to know what you're doing. And there's just a barrier there to getting going with this. And this is data that you need. And the upshot of this is you turn it on at the account level as of, when this was available sometime last week. And any clusters you create going forward will just have it. Love that. And if you've got pre-existing clusters that don't have it, you just do a cluster edit and it'll go through. wonderful. I think that's a zero downtime change as well, which is nice. So yeah, just use this. Presumably it's not horrifically expensive because CloudWatch isn't.
Cool. Thank you very much. Okay, on that note, let's move along to our second article for this week, which is a new feature been released in Amazon EventBridge. It's an announcement that EventBridge now can do direct delivery to cross-account targets. So events can be consumed in multiple accounts. Boyan's looking pretty excited about this one, so I'm going to come straight to you, Boyan, for to share your excitement about this new feature.
The amount of times that I just had to go, okay, we're going to create more latency for you by going from EventBridge to source to target to so on and so forth. I love the reduction of latency. I love the fact that I don't have to over-engineer a bit of my infrastructure as code to kind of get to that point. And I feel that with this now implementation, you can rethink the way that you do, I would say, some of your streaming logic as well. If you're using EventBridge, typically you may have done it just from workload accounts, but now you may want to choose to centralize it if it can target multiple. We've built a lot, or rather, I'll talk about the stuff that I've worked on, not just say we as Mantle Group. I've worked on a lot of clients where we've had to do this sort of model across multiple different accounts to target different options using like fan out method and such, right, through EventBridge, and having to now tell them, hey, you can just remove your EventBridge because you didn't need any replay, no dead letter queue, no customization is just great. I love simplicity in design. Like keep it simple, stupid is I think something I'll eventually get tattooed on me, right? And this is it. This is fantastic.
You just want a kiss tattoo, really, don't you?
Yeah, basically. Like
what about with the tongue? Simplexity? Could that be another tattoo? Werner's Simplexity theme from his.
I feel like Werner's followed that with frugal architect somewhere down the neckline or so. You know, it's appropriate if it's what do you call Werner-esque, right?
Absolutely, yeah. John,
yeah, but no, it's fantastic. Like, I mean, I think we've come a long way with EventBridge. A lot of the time, we've had to move into things like MSK ourselves only because of the kind of the flexibility you get with some of these open source solutions like Kafka and such. Again, there's some thing about whether or not it's open source, but I digress. The traditional sort of streaming usages that weren't cloud native, now I have a stronger case for, hey, you can just use one bus for everything.
John, your thoughts on this one?
No notes. It's rare that someone else goes before me and says everything. I'm not used to this. I saw a lot of noise about this from a number of my sort of serverless friends, for lack of a better term. One of our former user group speakers, Ryan, said was quite excited about this as well, because Motorway do a lot of this kind of event streaming and all that kind of thing. And this just cuts out a whole load of what AWS would call undifferentiated heavy lifting, because you don't have to send EventBridge to something in your account to then get it to hop to another account to then do stuff with it from there. Just send it direct. Brilliant, job done. If you can cut a load of services out, that saves you time on your architecture, that saves you time on your IAC, that saves you latency on your actual requests, that saves you another thing that you have to monitor. Potentially it saves you costs, depending on how you've done that fan out and the scale that you're working at. No notes. This is great.
And does it work across organizations as well, or just within an organization?
I can't imagine why it wouldn't work cross account, because EventBridge isn't an org level service as such. It's an account level service to an extent. It's regional, right? But you think of it as an account level service. It's not an org level service, and I don't think it's org aware, which basically means it doesn't matter where the account lives. It's just not me, so it's another account.
Just need to have the right permissions.
Yep. Cool. Okay. We like. Always good to see things that we like. On that note, let's move along to our next article for this week. Perhaps a little bit more of a dry subject with serverless, but we're on to the subject of backup, which of course is...
Backup is a serverless service, technically.
Ooh, okay.
True.
Well, let's put a serverless spin on it so we can get excited about this too.
We've got two serverless guys in the podcast again. What do you think's going to happen?
Absolutely. So let's talk about serverless backup. This is an article on TechTarget about 4 AWS best practices for reliable data protection. So, of course, AWS Backup is a core part of our service offering to our customers. So, John, I know you're fiddling with it on a regular basis. The AWS Backup, that is.
Tiny fiddle.
So walk us through some of these best practices, and once you've done that, I'm also keen to know if there's any best practices of your own that you might like to share that are not included in this article. Not to put you guys on the spot, but let's
That's why
see.
we're here. So, I mean,
Exactly.
these are not unknown things if you work in not just the cloud, right? If you work in the cloud, if you work in tech generally, these are kind of reasonably good things to know anyway. So, the first one is balance retention periods and storage costs. This has always been a problem. It's a bit more keenly felt in the cloud because, as I forget who said it first, but I'm certainly heard Corey Quinn saying it. In the cloud, your architecture and your cost strategy are the same thing. And that kind of bears fruit here, right? I want to keep my backups for as long as possible. Okay, we're just going to pay a load of money for that. I want to keep my backups for as little. I want to pay as little as possible for my backups. Cool. You can't hang on to them for very long. Those are kind of the paradigms you're playing with here. And you sort of need to work out how long you need to keep stuff for versus how much you're willing to spend on it. Because I've got no money to spend. Cool. You can have one day then, because most services give you that for nothing. Brilliant. I've got loads of money to spend. Great. I can hang on to them for a long time. Or you've got some really esoteric sort of audit conditions, then you need to work out what you can get away with doing as a minimum if you need to keep your costs down. So that's kind of reasonably well known. Next one is a bit more cloud focused, and it's optimized management with tagging. Now, we do this quite a lot, actually, and AWS talk about tags in any service as much as possible. I think they love tags, which is fine, makes sense. But the way we deal with this is you can use backup plans to say, oh, this tag, you go into that plan, you get backed up like this, and you keep for that long, and you go into that vault, and you do this cross account or cross region copy or whatever. And it's just a case of doing things like that to make your life easy. Make a plan, make a policy, put vaults and things in place, target resources with tags, easy peasy. Copying and implementing cross-region replication. Now, this one is it's a best practice, I guess, but it kind of ties in with the first point because the more places you store things, the more money you're going to spend. So if you have particularly aggressive RPO, RTO type deals and you have to worry about cross-region outages, then you want to think about cross-account and cross-region backup copies. Cross-account is more useful for audit purposes, I find, because in a lot of cases, you're not worried about an entire account going down. Maybe you are for account takeover reasons, but then you're probably not thinking about standing your resources back up particularly. Maybe you are. I don't know. It depends on what you're running. And then the last one is set RPO and RTO goals. And I've just said those acronyms, but we all have a TLA around here. I am going to explain them. RPO is your recovery point objective, which is how far back in time you can afford to lose data. And RTO is your recovery time objective, which is how quickly you need to get things running. These numbers, you often see them being pretty similar, but they don't have to be. So you could have an RPO of a week, because I'm quite happy losing a week of data, but my RTO needs to be 10 minutes. So I'm okay losing a week, but I need to be up in 10 minutes. That's quite kind of tricky to do because if your RTO is 10 minutes, odds are you're looking at a hot copy anyway. So your RPO is going to be pretty slim. So you tend to see the numbers fairly close to each other. And that's about the size of it for cloud best practices for AWS Backup. And honestly, that kind of covers it. The big ones for me are always around the costs and making sure that you're not over backing up. So I don't have any kind of extra recommendations on that, but I do have one thing to tell the listeners, which it's basically impossible to work out how much your backups are going to cost in AWS. And I'm sorry for this because their pricing is magic. You pay for the difference between your backups. What do I mean by that? Well, the first backup you pay for it, depending on the service, it might be free. You might have to pay for it. And then the next backup and the one after that and the one after that, you only pay for the data that's different between them. If you've got a terabyte backup and it's 1 gig different from the first one to the second one, you're only going to pay for that gig. So you can't ever work out how much these are going to cost with any level of reliability. And I'm sorry, but it is cheap.
Boyan, thoughts on this? Anything to add?
No, spot on, but I feel that the article itself didn't go into detail on one critical component, which was testing. First of all, John, absolutely right. You filled in, I'd say 99.9% of the things that I would have said, especially on the point of like aligning of how much are you going to actually willingly back up. In Australia, as well as other regions, there's compliance measures that are being met. And that's the biggest headache when it comes to backups. And I say headache because usually the compliance measures were set in a time when both spinning rust and tape was the ideal backup for long-term storage, right? Where your biggest issue was when you were meeting a compliance target is how quickly can I either put the tapes in or how quickly can the robot arm eject, inject, and then restore from that point. Testing, however, I think isn't spoken high enough. And that's mainly because backup's pointless unless you know that it's going to work. And not particularly cross-region. You may choose to be an organization that has to prove their testing through further compliances that will come into the future. Because as we know, government is slow, businesses are really slow, but auditing and compliance medical standards are the slowest, right? And by that standard, if and when that does come out, you want to have the ability to prove your backups actually work. So I think like testing, considering automation behind it, and just putting in some time and effort into it, because the eventual trade-off is that in case of a disaster, not only do you have a playbook, you have a proven method.
And there is an automated way to do that within AWS Backup now, which I think is a feature that was launched last year, perhaps. I'm sure we spoke about it. Can you talk a little bit about that, John?
I'm a little bit kind of bearish about it, to be really honest, because the automated restore testing is great at proving that AWS Backup can restore things, which is sort of what you'd expect AWS to be doing behind the scenes anyway, as part of a managed service. So it's a bit tick boxy to prove to an auditor that you have done a restore this quarter. But until you have some sort of way of validating the data integrity within that restore, standing everything up and going, yeah, it actually is what it was 3 months ago when I took that backup, it's of limited value. And to be fair, I did press some AWS folks on this at reInvent, and they sort of said the same thing. It's one of those, well, we did it to allow for kind of compliance, but it's of limited value until you can start hooking things up. And that's just a lot of engineering work to get that to work.
Yeah, it's all very well to test that data can be restored, but if your app doesn't work with that restored data, then it's kind of useless, isn't it? Yeah. So but then we're talking more of a kind of a full DR test rather than backup, which is a little bit of a wider scope. Quick question on the article: did either of you spot the typo?
Oh, that depends. I write like an Australian, so my S's
I spent a fair bit of time Googling Amazon EDS yesterday in case it was a service that I'd never heard of, but I'm pretty sure that's meant to be RDS in the context.
Oh, you're right.
There is a disaster recovery service. There is a that I hadn't come across until I started looking into it last week. But yeah, I don't think it's that.
Elastic Disaster Recovery, yeah.
It's
So
EDR,
EDR, yeah. But I'm pretty sure it's a typo. I think it's meant to say RDS. Anyway, there we are. If anyone from Tech Target is listening, you might want to correct that one. So on that note, let's move along to our fourth article for this week, which is all about security best practices to mitigate ransomware attacks. So I think we spoke about this ransomware attack that's now targeting S3 buckets on the podcast last week. And I think we mentioned a few ways to mitigate these attacks last week. But this article's specifically talking about AWS has released some best practices to mitigate these ransomware attacks. So I'll come to you first on this one, Boyan. What are your thoughts here?
Well, having reading the article, a lot of this has been something that they've been speaking about verbatim for years. Like, for example, implement short-term credentials. And that's something that, if we consider even the principle of least privilege as a key pillar, don't have the ability to do, even if you have the ability to do a small amount of things, don't have that always on or always readily available in the sense of like, I have a 24-hour, 24/7 session availability, right? Keep your sessions short, that sort of stuff. The one in particular that's always been painful to implement on our side has been the MFA side. If you've got an infrastructure as code, build out buckets, and you're also going to do, for example, bucket permissions and such, and you're going to allocate MFA. If you're kind of in the world of CDK, which I love, it's kind of painful to be more granular with that. If you're more on the API side with Terraform, it is a little bit easier to do. Otherwise, I do feel one that I kind of want to, I would say, slightly call out. I like the idea, but we're going to put our cost hat on as well. I'm going to take a line from John, what Werner said, repeating that verbatim. I'm not all for an anomalous activity side when the expense exceeds the return. I believe what they're trying to allude here is like utilizing things like what they call guard duty or setting up anomalous CloudWatch alarms and metric alerts and such to get to your point where you can quickly address these solutions. I think you need to be very contextually aware of what you're trying to protect to understand where the anomaly protection will come in. So I think being mindful of what they call where and what your data is in your S3 buckets, in particular in this case, is going to be critical. I like the concept of anomalous activity. I love that people are using things like LLMs to improve that today, but your wallet can thin out very quickly if not done right.
Yeah, and there's a lot of false positives with that kind of thing in my experience, that this is an anomaly. No, it isn't. That's just normal. You just haven't seen it before.
Could you imagine tying that to something like PagerDuty and waking people up at 3 a.m.,
Yeah,
4
yeah,
a.m.,
yeah, yeah.
5
Well,
a.m. every day?
yeah, yeah. We've been there, done that. So yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a line, isn't there? I mean, guard duty is quite good once it's got data, but it takes time to sort of get up to speed. And then,
Exactly.
you get this user has successfully logged into this RDS instance in an unfamiliar way. It's just logged in. It's just the first time that's happened. Fortunately, that's a low, so it just sort of comes through. And if you've got your alerting set up properly, then it's fine. But if you're sending everything out to PagerDuty, then you need to have a long, hard think and a long, hard look at yourself in the mirror. And what are you trying to achieve with this? This article is a bit interesting for me because we spoke about the bucket encryption last week, and the tips were sort of from last week as well. And the fourth tip is basically the same, which is restrict SSE usage when unnecessary. Now, SSE is server-side encryption, customer, and the idea is you're providing your own key material. So AWS recommends doing exactly the same thing that I recommended, which is block it if you don't need it for a specific reason. Because if you can't use it, no one else that's managed to get illegitimate access can come into your system and then use it for their purposes, which was exactly the attack vector that we were seeing with the S3 ransomware attacks that we spoke about last week, which was they were getting in through leaked credentials. So stop putting credentials in GitHub for starters, but they were getting in through leaked credentials, and then they were encrypting everything with their own keys and setting policies whereby the data would delete itself after a week or 2 weeks or something. So just don't let them do that. Just turn the damn things off.
I think the
Why
point they
might you
made
not want
about
to do that though?
I mean, I'm a big fan of let AWS do the thing, right? They run databases better than I can. They do scaling better than I can. They look after servers and data center better than I can. I'm going to use them. I don't need, unless there's a specific regulatory requirement, to provide my own key. Just use KMS or use S3, SSE S3. Just use the default encryption. It's fine. It's fully transparent to the application. And okay, it's a bit security theater because you can't have a test that it was encrypted because it's fully transparent to you. So it's a bit, hello, Mr. Auditor. We pushed the button that said it's encrypted and AWS promised that it's encrypted. But you can't go and validate that. But if you need to do that, do that. If all you're trying to achieve here is a tick box for an auditor, just use SSE S3. If you genuinely need to validate that it's properly encrypted, encrypt it application side and then send the encrypted data. Don't do this.
Yeah, don't
Sorry, Brian.
rely on the
No, go for it.
Don't rely on infrastructure to fix a problem that software should be doing in the first place. Absolutely right. And I feel that at times we forget ourselves in the cloud world that we can always have an infrastructure solution to for code.
Cool. I was just going to say apologies for talking over you, Brian, and I did it again. So just wanted to give you the opportunity to speak there. So on that note, let's move along to our final article for this week, which is an article on the AWS architecture blog. The title is Enhance the Resilience of Critical Workloads by Architecting with Multiple AWS Regions, which always sounds wonderful. I think that, you've got these global regions and you can just have an application in one and fail over to another one, and doesn't matter if a nuclear bomb gets dropped on the first region, your application will be up and running in the second region. And I did have a read through this article, and it's fairly light on detail for what I know to be actually a pretty difficult and complicated thing to do. So whilst it sounds wonderful, and we often have these conversations with customers who'd like to do this sort of thing, once you delve a little bit deeper, it turns out perhaps it's not quite so easy to achieve this sort of thing in reality. So Boyan, what are your thoughts on this? Have you done this for any Mantel customers? Have you talked them out of it? Where's your head on
We
this?
have. So Australia was gifted with another region not so long ago. The Melbourne region got spun up for us, and as with all new regions, you give it about a year for it to have enough of the services and the hardware enabled. And a couple of the, should we say, tier one, like financial institutions that we work with, were considering going down that path. We quickly forget ourselves that cross-region, even though it may be an hour's flight away, cross-region costs for data transfer is a thing. Now, AWS has made things a little bit nicer with things such as Aurora distributed SQL and like multi-region availability of like Dynamo and pretty much every one of their data services. So it means on the data plane side, we can incur at quite a large cost the ability to go across multiple regions and get all this wonderful resilience. But I think we kind of forget that availability zones are pretty damn resilient, right? That if there is a major earthquake by AWS's standards, one AZ should be far enough or distinct geographically enough to the other that I should be able to facilitate that. Now, in my mind, and what we've experienced before when there's been errors of this sort of caliber, it hasn't been so much as an AZ going down that we need to worry about. I'm going to criticize AWS here a little bit. AWS software engineers pushing something out and ruining the API. If you think back 2018 or so, the EC2 API issues, someone in US East 1 made an EC2 API change that stopped all auto scaling, any changes in your console, and so on and so forth. No cross region is going to save you there. So I'm a bit bearish, only because it's just such a high expense that only really the giga scalers, so people who need things like Netflix and such, and funnily enough, that's one of the examples that they actually mentioned, would really benefit from that, because it's also a giant pool of resources you have available as well if you're splitting your compute loads across regions. So yeah, that's kind of where I sit on that. I like the idea. It's great to put in a resume, but I'm very conscious of why do we need it when we have AZs?
I'm a similar sort of mindset, to be really honest. I've had this conversation with some of our customers and in previous roles as a customer, and they sort of say, "So, do you care about multi AZ? Yes. Do you care about multi region? No.
No.
Poxy little website. Like, if the London region goes down, I'm going home. Like,
Half the internet goes down.
yeah, like if the London region goes down, we've got bigger problems than is my little website running. Like I have things I need to deal with that aren't that, because big chunks of the internet have also gone down. So again, it feels like, and the article kind of calls it out a little bit around meeting regulatory and compliance requirements. Again, it feels like audit not keeping up with reality, because it's very, very unlikely that you're going to take out an entire AWS region with anything short of a nuclear explosion. And in which case, again, bigger problems.
Hmm.
You said you're going home, John. You'd probably be at home anyway because you work from home. So
Yeah, but I'd go and make a coffee, go and find some, go sort of work out, oh, do I need to find a nuclear bunker? Do I need to go and, raid the local shop with all of its toilet paper? Like, what sort of level of problem is this?
more importantly, explain to the family why the Wi-Fi isn't working.
Yeah, radiation will do that,
Wi-Fi's
right?
out.
No, spot on.
So there we go. On that note, we have reached the end of our time for season 4, episode 4 of Logicast. So if you're still listening, thank you for making it to the end. Thank you, Boyan, for sharing your insights and for joining us, which I know is in your evening. So I'm very impressed with your commitment to the cause, flying an hour and a half to run your serverless meetups and sitting up between 9 and 10 o'clock at night to chat AWS with us. So thank you very much for your input, Boyan. John, thank you, as always, for your input. If you enjoyed the podcast, we are available to download from wherever you download your podcast. So please feel free to share it and tell your friends. If you'd like to see the funny faces we're pulling when we're talking to you, we also stream on YouTube. So check out our YouTube channel for every episode of Logicast. This was season 4, episode 4. It was actually our 99th episode that we've recorded since we started. So the 100th anniversary next week. I'm sure John will be exercising his Apple reactions at every opportunity. So thank you again for listening, and we'll see you again next time.